The child was not supposed to survive. When the scout ship Everest crashed on Drune 4, the last thing its desperate crew expected was that their emergency escape pods would be scattered across an unforgiving alien landscape. The planet, a swamp-choked expanse of perpetual twilight, was deemed uninhabitable for humans. Yet, against all odds, 5-year-old Alex Carter had made it through the crash. Alone, the natives of Drune 4, a species known as the Vrail, found the small, pink-skinned creature barely clinging to life in the wreckage. To them, it was a strange, fragile thing, hairless, defenseless, and oddly loud. But there was something in its eyes that made the elder Vrail hesitate before leaving it to the beasts. Something defiant. The tribe's matriarch, Karith, made a choice that would change the fate of their world forever. Alex Carter, last survivor of Everest, was raised among the Vrail. Their culture was built on survival and submission to the will of the great overlords, massive, insectoid conquerors who had ruled Drune 4 for centuries. The overlords saw the Vrail as little more than servile creatures, fit for labor and tribute, but unworthy of ambition. The Vrail, in turn, had learned to accept their place, knowing that resistance meant extermination. Alex did not accept this. From the moment he could speak their language, he questioned everything. Why do you let them take your food? Why do you bow when they pass? Why do you let them hurt you? The Vrail had no answers, only uneasy glances and murmurs about the fate of those who resisted. But Alex was human, and humans were stubborn. He learned their ways, fought in their training rituals, and despite his smaller size, proved himself with sheer tenacity. When he was struck down, he got back up. When he failed, he tried again. The Vrail began to whisper among themselves. Never had they seen such persistence. Never had they witnessed such refusal to accept defeat. The overlords noticed too. When Alex reached adolescence, the first real test came. An overlord enforcer arrived in the village to collect the seasonal tribute, a selection of young Vrail to be taken away, their fates unspoken but understood. The Vrail gathered, heads bowed. The enforcer, a towering beast with chitinous limbs and cold, glowing eyes, pointed at 3 children. Alex stepped forward. "No," he said in the Vrail tongue. "You will not take them." The enforcer laughed, a horrible, rasping sound. "A human? I thought your kind were long extinct here." It moved to swat him aside. Alex did what no Vrail had ever done before. He did not bow. He did not submit. He fought. The battle was not glorious. Alex was fast, but the overlord was stronger. It tossed him aside, cracked his ribs, and would have crushed him outright had the Vrail not done something unprecedented. They fought back. In that single, irreversible moment, they chose rebellion over submission. The enforcer fell beneath a storm of crude weapons and raw fury. For the first time in centuries, an overlord lay dead on Drune 4, not by accident, but by defiance. And the revolution began. Alex became a symbol, an idea that spread like wildfire across the planet. His refusal to kneel awakened something ancient in the Vrail, something the overlords had spent generations crushing: hope. Other villages heard the tale of the human who stood against the masters, and one by one, they too chose to fight. The overlords retaliated, sending extermination squads, but by then, it was too late. The Vrail had seen that their rulers could bleed, and if they could bleed, they could die. What began as a single act of defiance turned into a planet-wide uprising. Overlords fell. Their cities burned. Their mighty war machines, once symbols of unstoppable power, became broken monuments to a dying empire. And at the heart of it all was Alex Carter, the human child who had grown into something more than a survivor. He was their leader, their legend, their revolution. And when the first human starship arrived in orbit, responding to an old distress signal long thought lost, they found not a broken world under alien rule, but a free planet, standing proud. One child had changed the course of an entire species, and the galaxy would never be the same. When the first human starship, the USS Valkyrie, arrived in orbit over Drune 4, Captain Elaine Rourke could hardly believe the sensor readings. What should have been a subjugated world, another forgotten planet under the heel of an alien empire, was teeming with signs of war and, more astonishingly, freedom. The distress signal from the long-lost Everest had been a faint whisper across the void, an echo of tragedy. The expectation was to find wreckage, at best. What they found instead was an army. Alex Carter stood on the surface, staring up at the descending ship. He was no longer the fragile child who had once barely survived on this world. He was something else entirely now. A warrior, a leader, and to the Vrail, a legend made flesh. His once human features bore the hardened marks of a life lived in war. Scars tracing across his arms, his jaw set with the weight of command. His Vrail armor, crafted from the shattered carapaces of fallen overlords, made him look more alien than human. The landing ramp extended, and Captain Rourke stepped forward, flanked by an armed security detail. Alex didn't move, didn't speak, only studied her with the piercing gaze of someone who had seen too much. "Lieutenant Alexander Carter?" she asked, scanning the face that barely resembled the child in the old Everest records. He let the name linger in the air. It felt distant, like an echo of a person he had once been but could no longer claim to be. "I was," he finally said. "Now, I am simply Alex of the Vrail." Behind him, thousands of Vrail warriors stood at the ready, their chitin-forged weapons gleaming in the pale light of Drune IV's twin moons. Their revolution was far from over. Rourke took a slow breath, glancing over the gathered force. "Your distress beacon led us here, but I don't think you need rescuing." Alex allowed himself a rare smile, though there was little humor in it. "No, Captain. We aren't the ones in danger." The truth was, the Overlord's grip on Drune 4 had shattered, but their empire still loomed beyond the stars. The Vrail had won a battle, but the war had yet to begin. And now, for the first time in generations, the Vrail weren't just a scattered people fighting for scraps. They had a leader. They had unity. They had him. "Then why send the signal?" Rourke asked, eyes narrowed. "Because war is coming," Alex said simply. "The Overlords won't ignore what happened here. They'll return, and they'll bring their full might." His voice hardened. "And when they do, we won't just be defending this planet. We'll be taking the fight to them." Rourke studied him carefully. What she saw was something rare, something dangerous. A man who had been raised among warriors, tempered by hardship, and reforged into a legend. He wasn't just asking for help. He was inviting humanity into a war it didn't yet know it was part of. "You want us to fight," she said. Alex shook his head. "I want us to win." Silence hung between them. Then Rourke did something unexpected. She extended her hand. "Then let's talk strategy." As Alex clasped it, the fate of the galaxy shifted. Because for the first time in history, the humans and the Vrail weren't just allies. They were a revolution. And soon, the Overlords would learn that no empire, no matter how vast, could stand forever against those who refused to kneel. The months that followed were a whirlwind of preparation, alliances, and brutal combat. Alex Carter, now a general in the newly formed coalition of free worlds, led the Vrail with a fire that had never been seen on Drune 4. His leadership was both a beacon and a weapon, and the galaxy was soon to realize that the rebellion on Drune was the first spark of a much larger fire. The Overlords had not yet come in force, but their silence was more terrifying than any invasion. Alex knew it was only a matter of time before their fleets arrived, their war machines looming over the planet. They had crushed countless civilizations before. The Overlords were arrogant in their belief that they were invincible, and Alex intended to prove them wrong. Meanwhile, Captain Rourke and the crew of the USS Valkyrie had become his most trusted advisors. The Federation was no stranger to warfare, but nothing had prepared them for the brutal realities of a planet torn by centuries of occupation. The Vrail, though technologically primitive compared to Earth standards, had an unrivaled knowledge of guerrilla tactics and survival strategies. Alex combined their ancient wisdom with Federation military doctrine, creating a strategy that was as unpredictable as it was effective. The first assault came faster than anyone expected. Overlord warships descended from the void, massive and dark, their engines leaving streaks of fire across the sky. The Vrail, ready and waiting, launched their own counteroffensive, a hybrid of ancient weaponry and stolen Overlord tech. Alex was on the front lines, directing the defense from the planet's surface. He had become a figurehead, not just of the Vrail, but of the entire rebellion. He was their leader, their hope, and their fury. The Overlord Enforcer ships cut through the Vrail defenses like a hot knife through butter, but they hadn't counted on one thing: Alex's knowledge of their tactics. He had studied them for years, watched their every move, learned their weaknesses. And now, the tables were turning. One of the key moments in the war came during the Battle of the Shattered Moon, when Alex led a daring assault on a hidden Overlord base. It was a strategic gamble, an infiltration mission that could either end in victory or annihilation. The Federation had provided the tech, the Vrail had provided the manpower, and Alex had provided the vision. The mission was a success, and the Overlord base fell. But it wasn't the victory that made history. It was what Alex discovered hidden inside the base. The Overlords weren't simply conquerors. They were parasites. Their entire empire was held together by a cruel, parasitic technology that allowed them to feed on the energy of entire civilizations. It was how they maintained control of their vast territory. Without it, their empire would collapse. Alex sent the coordinates of the base to Rourke. It was time to take the fight to them. The Federation could send reinforcements, but he and the Vrail would be the spearhead. The Overlords had taken everything from them. Now, they would take back what was theirs. Alex's next move was a bold one. He called for a fleet-wide rallying cry across the galaxy, broadcasted to every corner of space where the Overlords had ever held sway. His message was simple and direct. The Overlords will fall, and we will make them remember the name of Drune 4. As the rebellion's forces rallied under Alex's banner, the galaxy responded. Ships and soldiers from countless worlds, each with their own stories of oppression, joined the cause. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for freedom, for a future where the Overlords could never again dictate the lives of others. The final battle came at the Overlords' homeworld, a dark and desolate planet at the center of their empire. The skies were thick with the smoke of war, and the ground trembled beneath the pounding of massive Overlord war machines. Alex stood at the helm of the flagship Vrail's Wrath, a ship designed by the Vrail but outfitted with Federation tech. Rourke stood beside him, her face a mixture of determination and uncertainty. They had come this far, but they knew the cost of failure. "Are you ready?" Rourke asked. Alex's eyes, filled with the weight of 1,000 battles, never wavered. "I've been ready for this my whole life." The battle raged in space and on the ground. The Overlord's forces were fierce, but they were unprepared for the unity that had formed under Alex's leadership. Humans, Vrail, and countless other species fought side by side, unstoppable in their fury. And for the first time in centuries, the Overlords were the ones on the defensive. Their massive ships began to fall, one by one, as Alex's strategy unraveled their empire from the inside out. Finally, it came to the Overlord's capital city, a sprawling metropolis of towering spires and shimmering fortresses. Alex and his elite squadron made their way into the heart of the city, where the Overlord's ruler awaited, seated upon a throne of bone and metal. The confrontation was inevitable. Alex faced the Overlord King in his throne room, the weight of history pressing down on him. The alien stood tall, its form a grotesque blend of insectoid and machine, a living monument to tyranny. It sneered down at Alex. "You think you can defeat me, human? You are nothing but a child, a fleeting spark in the eternal dark. We are the Overlords. We are invincible." Alex stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "You were invincible until you met someone who refuses to kneel." The battle between Alex and the Overlord King was a clash of wills, of worlds. But it wasn't just strength that Alex had. He had the power of unity behind him. The Overlord King fell, defeated not just by Alex's hand, but by the revolution he had ignited in the hearts of countless species. When the Overlord Empire crumbled, it was more than just the fall of a tyrannical regime. It was the dawn of a new era. And in that era, Alex Carter, the human child who had once been lost on an alien world, stood as a symbol of defiance, strength, and freedom. The galaxy would never forget his name, and neither would the stars. The fall of the Overlords sent shockwaves across the galaxy, rippling through every world that had once known fear under their rule. Alex Carter, now a living legend, stood before the ruins of the Overlord capital, watching as the last of their fleet crumbled in the sky above him. The galaxy had been reshaped, but the work was far from over. For the first time in centuries, the people of countless worlds stood free. But freedom was not a singular victory. It was a war, one that would continue to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. As the remaining Overlord commanders fled into the depths of space, fractured but not yet fully defeated, Alex knew that the true test had only begun. His revolution had shattered an empire, but it had not eradicated its ideologies. The Overlords had been just the first tyrants to fall. Now came the difficult part, rebuilding. Alex's coalition, the Union of Free Worlds, began to take shape. He, along with Captain Rourke and the Federation fleet, worked tirelessly to establish a new government. A government that would honor the autonomy of every world and species, with no central authority imposing its will. The Vrail, once a subjugated species, were now integral to the new coalition, their warriors standing side by side with humans and others in the quest for a peaceful future. But peace, Alex soon realized, was not something easily achieved. His victory over the Overlords had inspired many, but it had also sparked unrest among those who saw the collapse of one empire as an opportunity to build another. Fractious factions began to emerge, each with their own vision for the galaxy's future. It was in the midst of this fragile peace that an unexpected force arrived. A new coalition of ruthless warlords, hailing from once-conquered systems, began to unify under the banner of the Draxan Consortium, an organization formed from the remnants of destroyed empires. Led by the cunning and ambitious warlord Valak Draxan, the Consortium sought to fill the power vacuum left by the Overlords. They had no interest in equality or autonomy. They wanted domination. Alex stood at the head of the newly formed Council of the Free Worlds, watching the intelligence reports that came in from Federation scouts. The Draxan Consortium was growing in strength, expanding its reach across the galaxy, and its leaders were not the type to engage in diplomatic discourse. They believed in power, brute, uncompromising, and absolute. The council convened on Terra Prime, where representatives from dozens of species gathered. Alex, now in his late 20s, had grown into a true leader, but even his resolve had been tested by the burdens of governance. The galaxy he had fought for was still fractured, and in the distance, the shadow of war loomed once again. "We can't wait any longer," said Rourke, her voice low but firm. "The Draxan Consortium is no longer a small threat. They've seized entire sectors in the Outer Rim. We're going to have to take the fight to them before they come for us." Alex nodded, his gaze drifting to the hollow map projected before him. The Consortium was vast, with countless fleets of mercenaries and scavenged warships. They were ruthless, using the fear that had once been bred by the Overlords to rally the galaxy's more desperate systems under their banner. The only way to prevent a new empire from rising in the ashes of the old one was to strike first. But he knew that a direct assault would come at a great cost. Alex wasn't just thinking of his people anymore. He was thinking of all the lives that had been lost and won in this fight for freedom. This war, if it went unchecked, would consume them all. "We need a plan that doesn't just rely on force," Alex said, his voice steady. "We need to divide them, create dissent within their ranks. We need to show the galaxy that the Consortium is nothing more than another group of tyrants, and that they are no more invincible than the Overlords were." Rourke raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about infiltrating their command structure, destabilizing their leadership from within?" Alex gave a small nod. "Exactly. We use their own tactics against them. We've already seen their weaknesses. The Draxan Consortium is built on fear and coercion. They don't have the unity we've built. They're just a patchwork of warlords, each with their own agenda. We turn them against each other, and when the time is right, we strike." The plan was risky, but it was their only option. The council agreed, and soon Alex's old allies, the Vrail, the Federation, and countless resistance movements, began to mobilize. Rourke, now a seasoned strategist in her own right, took command of the Federation fleet. Alex, as always, led from the front, taking the fight to the Consortium's inner circle. The first strike came in the dead of night. A covert mission to infiltrate the Consortium's command base, located on a heavily fortified asteroid in the Draco Expanse. Alex led the charge, flanked by elite Vrail warriors and Federation operatives. The mission was swift, a surgical strike that crippled the consortium's supply chain and severed their communications with the outer colonies. But it wasn't enough to stop Draxon. He was a master of strategy, and his revenge was swift. The consortium retaliated with a ferocity that shocked even Alex. The skies burned with the remnants of battleships as the war escalated into full-scale conflict. Alex's forces fought valiantly, but the cost was high. The Draxon consortium had learned from the overlords. They were well-armed, organized, and above all, willing to sacrifice everything for control. But Alex had learned from the overlords, too. The war dragged on, each victory met with a wave of bloodshed, each setback pushing Alex further into a corner. Yet with each battle, the resolve of the coalition's forces only grew stronger. The Vrail, who had once been subjugated, now stood as equal partners in the struggle for a free galaxy. Humans, too, were not simply fighting for survival, they were fighting for something greater. A future without fear, without oppression. And as the final battle loomed, a decisive confrontation between the forces of the coalition and the Draxon consortium, the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Alex knew one thing for certain. They couldn't lose. Not after everything they had fought for. Not after all the lives that had been sacrificed. This war was for the future of the galaxy. And it was a future he would not let fall to tyrants, no matter what it cost him. The final battle came faster than anyone had anticipated. The Draxon consortium, emboldened by their ruthless victories, gathered their forces in a massive fleet. Dozens of warships, each one bristling with firepower, all converging on Terra Prime. The coalition's forces, though fractured and worn, stood firm. Alex, leading the charge once more, had a plan. One that would take everything they had,